So with us today is Brian Manderscheid. Brian Manderscheid has been with us for over 10 years, and Brian's our lead case designer. So he's specifically responsible for working on individual cases on a daily basis. So we're very excited to have Brian. Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. I really appreciate it. What we're going to do is talk about a case that I worked on recently here, and we'll show you a few different moves that we're able to make in this client's financial life to drastically improve their situation. And although not all of this may pertain to you, at least one of these ideas I'm going to talk to you today will definitely impact your life and put you in a much better financial situation. Jordan, you want to head over to the board?
Yeah, after you.
Great, thank you. So the couple that we're going to talk to you about is Richard and Grace Turner. And a couple things I want to discuss to you about, first and foremost, are the fact that they're 46 and 43 years old. Now, obviously the younger the better, but still at their ages, we can implement these proven wealth strategies and create a substantial difference in their financial plan.
Okay, so yeah, if we're younger than that compounding interest, we have time on our side, that's a good thing, right? And so ages, what does that typically range for you then on the cases that you work on?
I generally see, people fresh out of college actually, believe it
Okay.
or not, and like you mentioned, the younger the better because of that compounding interest. And leading up to retirement, in the mid-60s or so, we can actually implement these changes and create a substantial difference in their financial plan.
Okay, now I know everyone has different backgrounds, and some people are business owners, others are, they work for a company, and some people have home businesses. With what we're talking about here, are we talking about all those people? They all fit in this strategy in some way, shape, or form?
Great question. Now, Richard and Grace, actually Richard, he's an engineer at
Okay.
one of the local aerospace engineering firms, and Grace is actually an executive at a local firm as well.
Okay.
And so this does work for business owners, this works for even teachers, and really anyone looking to make a difference in their financial future.
Okay.
So when we talk about the Turner situation, really what we want to do is find out what they're doing and if it matches up to what they want.
Right.
So we talked about the characteristics in a wealth accumulation vehicle as the ideal things that you would want to look for. Now it turns out that what they were doing predominantly was contributing to their 401k provided by their employer. Now each of them, both Richard and Grace, were contributing $18,000 a year, the maximum, into their 401k.
So the max that we can contribute into our 401k account is $18,000?
Correct.
Currently?
Currently $18,000.
Okay.
So between the two of them, we had $36,000 that they're contributing to their 401k. Now, what are the reasons somebody would contribute to their 401k through their employer?
Well, like I mentioned earlier in our last previous video is, that tax deductible, which really is that tax postponement that we talked about.
Great point. Yeah, they
Yeah.
thought they were saving taxes. Instead, they're postponing taxes to a future later date when tax rates may be in fact higher. So if let's say they were to not do their 401k, they would receive that $36,000 as income, and they would be left with about $24,000 at their tax rate
Okay.
if they were to not do what they're doing.
Okay. Now I do have a question for you because one of the things that we talk about when we educate our clients working together, Brian, is that a lot of these people that are contributing to their 401ks get a match on their account. Now, did the Turners, do they have a match? And if so, what do you recommend when they do have that match?
Great question. Yeah, the Turners actually didn't have a match on their 401k contributions, which what you mentioned is that's really one of the biggest advantages other than the tax deferment, tax postponement, I should say, and they did not have that match.
Okay.
If they did have an employer match, really what we'd recommend is contribute just enough in order to receive that employer match, and for the additional portion, we can consider some other alternatives. Since they were high wage earners and they had a cap on how much they can contribute, they had an additional amount of income that they were dumping into their mutual fund account of about $20,000 per year. Now, again, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's great that they have the excess income to save. However, we only recommend that they have enough liquid for generally between 6 to 12 months of income. And based on their saving, they had quite a bit built up in these mutual fund accounts. And what we can instead do is, rather than being taxed on our gains, we can look at some alternatives where we're not taxed every year, and instead we're going tax preferred or tax free. Now the last thing that they're doing is, again, they were following the traditional financial advice, and they were in a big hurry to pay off their house, which is something that they heard on the radio. Now, what's interesting about the Turners is they actually had a great rate on their mortgage of about 4%. Now, one of the reasons that somebody owns a home is one of the columns here, the tax deductibility on the mortgage interest. So in their situation, the mortgage was only costing them about 2.5% because of the tax savings on the mortgage interest. And they were contributing about $2,000 a year in additional principal payments to the bank. Now, a couple things to point out is, the money that they built up in their equity through these contributions, they do have some access to these. However, how do they get that money is they have to go to the bank and prove to the bank that they have the ability to pay the bank back.
Right.
So there's limited liquidity with that money. And the second thing is, again, I mentioned that it's really only costing them 2.5% simple interest. And the vehicles that we can offer, we can definitely earn more than that with very limited risk. So we felt it was best to redirect that money, which I'll talk about here in a second.
So what we often do is, you're saying, is instead of maybe redirecting or instead of paying that extra principal payment, because with rates the way that they are right now so low that you're very confident that with that $2,000 we can put it in another vehicle that's going to earn more than 2.5% on a consistent basis, so that we grow that bigger nest egg, or we have the ability to then maybe pay off the house at a future point in time if we really needed to, but we don't want to because of what you circled here is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the vehicle that we're going to consider too has a lot more green boxes than red boxes.
Okay.
So what we did for Richard and Grace Turner, a couple things here. The three moves is, first, we redirected $36,000 pre-tax, but if we didn't contributed that to their 401k, they'd have $24,000 after tax at their tax rate. We also redirected $20,000 of contributions that they're making to their mutual fund companies into that taxable bucket. And then lastly, we had $2,000 they were sending to the bank in additional principal payments. So we total it up, that's $46,000 that they were already contributing to these various accounts. Now, it's important to note a couple things. First is the fact that we're not asking them to contribute an additional $46,000, which would prohibit them from doing things they like to do, like take the kids out to lunch and go on those vacations and the things that they're accustomed to.
Right.
But instead, all we're showing them is a more efficient way to make those contributions to get more and better benefits and to avoid the tax shredder, and also avoid what can happen with market losses as well. So if we redirect this $46,000 a year that they're already spending into, rather than this taxable and tax deferred buckets, but instead into a tax-free bucket, we can actually create substantial benefit in their financial picture. Wow. And what we're looking at here is a graph of the after-tax benefits we're able to create for them by just these three minor tweaks. And what you can see in red here is their current plan, assuming they follow the traditional wisdom, the things that they've read in the newspaper and what they may have read, on the internet and things like that.
So the red here is basically not that 46,000, but the amount that they were paying, the 36,000 of qualified money, because it wasn't getting taxed yet, and then the mutual funds and the additional payments. If they were doing that, which was actually more on an annual basis because it hasn't been taxed yet, you're saying that their overall after-tax benefit would be around $2.6 million.
Yep, that's the number right there. Now the amazing thing is, with these changes that we talked about here in green, you can see all the way out to 100, we've actually eclipsed the $10 million mark and created over $10 million in after-tax benefits. That's an $8 million swing in additional benefits that we're able to create with just three quick moves. Now, it's important to note that every client's financial situation is different,
Right.
and maybe not all of these would work for you, but just think that just by a few slight changes in your life can have a huge trajectory change in your future. So to summarize, for Richard and Grace Turner, really what we were able to do is redirect money that they are contributing to their employer-sponsored plans, which we're not receiving a match. Rather than saving taxes, they're postponing taxes.
Right.
We're also able to redirect money they're sending to mutual fund companies and money that they're sending to the bank as well, and redirect that into this account over here to the right, which really fits not in a taxable bucket or tax-deferred bucket, but instead a tax-free bucket.
So what I'm kind of saying here is that, what Kevin mentioned in the previous videos is we have our kind of our taxable account right here, our tax-deferred account right here, and now we're looking at our tax-free account and kind of diversifying our tax portfolio, if you will, versus having all of our eggs in one basket. So yeah, thanks, Brian. I think we've made you guys wait long enough with regards to discussing this green column. So what we're going to do in that next video is we're going to spend some time really reviewing that green column and looking at diversifying our tax portfolio, if you will. So you guys will see that video available right below. Please feel free to click on that at this point in time. And thanks, Brian, for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thanks for having me.